When we look at the hand-drawn maps, when we look at people talking about correct English and pleasant English, and then when we get even fussier and have people respond to low-level stuff, low-level phonetic signals, we begin to believe that there are two radically different theories of what a language is. This is what scientists believe. This is you. This is what's in your brain. My trick in Linguistics 101 is to ask people to point to their language. One of the first things I do in class, I say, point to your language. People look at each other and go, how'd he get in here? You know, what's this class about? And it takes them a long time to realize, oddly, if you're going to point to your language, this is where your language is, right? Because oddly, we can see on the top that real people somehow believe that language is exterior to cognition, that English exists outside of the brains of people. It ain't. Records of language exist outside your brain, but not language. The only place language is in cognition. So I take all of these cognitions and I add them up and I say, well, there's a level of abstraction where these cognitions kind of look the same to me. And don't ask me to quantify this, right? They kind of look the same to me, so I'm going to call it dialect 1. And then I take dialect 1 and dialect 2 and dialect 3, and I reach an even higher level of abstraction, something that doesn't exist at all, and call it a language. There's no such thing as English. There's no such thing as German. There's no such thing as Japanese. Sorry. There's just no such thing as a language. There's just a kind of political or social agreement that somehow we'll put these 3 or 4 dialects together and call them a language. You know this if you have ever driven from the Netherlands to Germany. Because when you come to the Dutch-German border, people stop speaking Dutch and start speaking German, right? No. Only if they're speaking stuff that they learned in school. What happens is that Dutch just becomes German. And the only reason that they're speaking Dutch in the Netherlands is because of the political boundary. There's no linguistic difference between Dutch and German. If you don't believe this, when did you last hear of the language Serbo-Croatian? Not very long ago. But now there's no longer a country for Serbo-Croatian to be in, so now there's a Serbian language and a Croatian language, right? Because there's no more Yugoslavia. Now there's a Serbia and a Croatia. And now, of course, since there's a Bosnia, there's even a Bosnian language, which wasn't even in the name Serbo-Croatian. This has happened within all of your lifetimes. So we can see that this, in fact, a clever old linguist once said, what's the difference between a dialect and a language? A language is a dialect with an army and a navy. So the linguistic differences from one dialect to another do not add up to language. But that's what linguists believe. This means that if you tell me that you're studying English, I just shrug and say, which one? I'm not interested that you're learning English, right? A lot of people who go study in Britain learn British English, which is completely incomprehensible to most of us here, right? Especially if you go to Yorkshire, some incredible place like that, where even people from the south of Britain don't understand Yorkshire English, right? So that you're studying English, that don't cut no ice with me, as we used to say down in Louisville, right? And if you're studying German, I want to know what German. If you're studying Japanese, I want to know what Japanese. And of course you say, well, you're making a big deal out of this, but what about the difference between peninsular Spanish and Latin American Spanish? And what the hell does Latin American Spanish mean? Aquí te puedo hablar español. En la manera del Caribe. Es un ejemplo de español de Latinoamérica. But most Latin Americans, especially those from Mexico, would say, what the hell is he doing? Where'd most of his consonants go, right? So, if people came to me to study Spanish, I would teach them my coastal Venezuelan Spanish. That's what they'd have to learn. Now, I know that in the Spanish-speaking world they would be laughed at and so forth, but that would be my problem. No, I'd actually be their problem, and I'd just be smiling somewhere. But look what real people believe, and we find this again and again, not just work in America, but work in other places as well. People believe that language has a separate existence outside of people's heads. That's just an incredible belief. And then good language is your pipeline to that, right? You've got some little thing here that comes out of your head and it goes to that language. And if that pipeline is clear and unobstructed, you don't have any linguistically aortic blockages, then you speak good language. Now, you know not to speak good language all the time, because if you go around speaking good language, is sort of preserved for writing in the university and so forth. You go around speaking good language, and this is not peculiarly American, but it is certainly decisively American. You don't want to be a fancy pants. Populism is a strong urge in America. So you can't go around speaking the good language that comes from the language. So you hear people all the time say, well, I know I don't speak perfectly, but, right? And that but's huge, right? Because that but means I'm a regular guy. I'm a real person. You know, I don't go around speaking like an English teacher or something even more despisable. What could that be? At any rate. So what you do is ordinary language, and underneath ordinary language are these incredible things like dialects and errors, which for real people have the same level of existence. They believe somehow that dialect speakers are people who have deviated from the ordinary language, and that in some way, and I could show you discoursal evidence of this, that they really know that they're doing stuff wrong. It's almost as if you could blame black people for being recalcitrant, or hillbillies for being silly. You know what the right rules are. Why do you go around saying, I go, you go, he goes, we go, you go, they goes? Why? Because it makes a hell of a lot more sense than just buzzing in the third person indicative. If there's anything ugly in the human language, it's buzzing in the third person indicative singular and not buzzing in the plural as well. I go, you go, he goes, we go, you go, they goes. Appellation conjugation makes a lot more sense. African American conjugation makes even more sense, doesn't it? I go, you go, he go, we go, you go, they go. No damn buzzing at all. And no need for buzzing, right? Because English is not a pro-drop language, so you already said I or you or he. You know whether it's singular or not. And look at the repair that we make on the second person pronoun. What's the singular second person pronoun in English? You. What's the plural? In standard English, it's disgustingly you. No distinction between singular and plural? What kind of language is that? So real people will not put up with linguistic stupidity. Linguistic stupidity is what almost every standard language has. It preserves rules where there is something fussy, historically, socioeconomically at stake. Tony Crockett at the University of Pennsylvania even says that, well, wealthier and middle class people have got so much invested in this that they want to keep stupidity as a symbol of their higher class. So, but nobody else